So we are here. Good afternoon, everybody. And first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity. It really does mean an awful lot to us. So HIS stands for Help, Information and Support. And we are basically personal development. We develop people. I'm just scrolling up, and obviously we all know the suicidal tendencies. And if I revert back to the APPG report with the 3 themes in the document, I would say as a charity, all of those 3 themes contribute to low self-esteem, mental ill health, underachievement and antisocial behaviour. Obviously substance misuse and crime, and unfortunately suicide at the last resort of that. So HIS was developed after a good friend of mine lost his life through suicide. He had no mental health prior. He had a car crash which made him go into a suicidal state, really, of depression and anxiety. It was no fault of his own. The other car she had a child without a seatbelt on, and the child got badly injured, and there was a police investigation, and that made him spiral out of control, really. He got signed off work. He actually spoke to his GP and told his GP what he was going to do. 3 weeks later, he said that he was still struggling, and then ended up having more medication prescribed over the phone, and then he took his life by hanging himself. So when I looked at that story, we thought, he literally fell through the gap in our system. He tried to talk and reach out to professionals, and still those needs were not met. From that, we developed HIS, and we've been going over just under 2 years now. It was built in lockdown, and where everything was shutting down, we started to form, and we developed a system where everything was done online. That was counselling, key working, social groups. We even started up a fishing group where tackle talk on Tuesdays, and chaps will jump online and just talk and be mindful of what that represented, of going out and fishing and just enjoying themselves and offloading, and that sort of thing worked. What we wanted the charity to do is not just to be a charity. We set it out to bridge that ever-growing gap, unfortunately, in our NHS system. We decided that we learned very quickly, actually, that we couldn't do it without forming a whole group, a tailor-made program for individuals, because you couldn't expect someone who was homeless or lived in a shell to have a very healthy mental health if they couldn't feed themselves or home themselves, or they had, like Ollie was saying, issues about childcare or poverty. So we formed the group that was groups that could be done online. And what really needed to be done was to make sure that we were on a level that people could understand and relate to, because there's lots of organisations out there, but it's making sure that we broke down those barriers so that those needs could be met. And obviously we all know at the suicide rates with the male ratio of 75% to females. So as I mentioned, we wanted to bridge that gap in our health system. And how we did that was to build a tailor-made program around an individual, and that is making sure that all of their human needs are met. And that is, we've very much work on holistics. So the mind, body and spirit is worked on. And we worked out also that with the 4 elements of those basic needs, of a person with love, belonging, achievement and purpose. That all of those needs need to be met before anything else can move on from that. And what we always say actually in the charity, that, I mean, we work with key stage 3 children all the way up to adulthood. But what our way of thinking is that we have men who have little broken boys inside them. So what we do as a charity is literally take them by the hand and nurture them and hold them as if that you was nurturing a child. And we walk them through their journey. We are a charity that doesn't put a time restriction on a person's healing. So we've had people that have been with us for 18 months and they've had 18 months of counselling every week, as well as having a key worker that will ring them 2 or 3 times a week. If that person is struggling, then sometimes that's daily or 3 or 4 times a day. So there is a massive communication that we have, and that communication's from the key worker, maybe the holistic therapist or the counsellor or the psychotherapist. We work as one team and literally support and hold that individual and making them feel safe and secure and able to breathe and move on with their healing, basically. Sorry, just taking a sip of my water. So as I mentioned, we are very tailor made. We have developed our own sort of version of the Maslow theory, which is a circle rather than hierarchy. And as I mentioned before, and this is through a learning experience actually, that everything has to be made and met with regarding food, shelter, finances, friends, family, and that bond and self-respect as well, and that fulfillment. We work with many local authorities, and we get quite a lot of referrals from GPs, social services, CAMS, self-referrals as well as ex-military and also probation officers. And we found that as a charity that we get quite a lot of referrals actually from those organisations, because one, they know that we will work with the individual as much as that individual needs us, but also there is not a timeline or a waiting list. So once the person's made a referral or we've done the triage system, they are basically receiving help straight away that day. And that makes a big, big difference to the individuals. There is unfortunately a sort of a pattern that has developed with the chaps that have come through, and also the children, and their parents will also say the same, is that they have been, it's almost like a game of tennis, they've been moved from pillar to post in their mental health recovery. We found that many of our clients start off by going to the GP. The GP will make a referral to the community mental health team or to the single point of access. They then get discharged, go back to the GP again, and vice versa. And we've had chaps that have been doing that for the last 25 years. I'll give you an example of one of the clients that we have just finished working with actually. So he came to us from his GP. He found that other charities would not work with him because unfortunately he was on the sex offenders register. He'd been in the system for 20 years, again moved from pillar to post, and then when he's going back to his GP after receiving, say for instance, 6 to 10 weeks counselling through the national health system, he's had to then go back again and reapply for more therapy. So as I mentioned, nobody would work with him, and he was explaining to me that he's literally been through the mill. He told me his story of the reason why he ended up with mental ill health, and and why he ended up on the sex offender register. Unfortunately, he described himself as Harry Potter, actually, the child that lived under the stairs, that was literally physically and sexually and mentally abused throughout all of his childhood. And then he went on to develop more mental health by the stigma, and also his self-esteem, and also how he was programming himself. He was extremely agoraphobic. He has a physical element as well with his pain, with his back, and he was in crippling pain. He also was obviously depressed, anxiety, OCD, and he found it extremely difficult to cope with life. He was codependent on his partner. And when he came to us, he was in an extremely bad way. First of all, he couldn't even talk on the telephone. So everything was done through a text. And then it moved on to telephone, to Zoom, and then to face-to-face. So he had to go to what we tend to do. So this is an example of what we did for him as a charity. He had to go in lockdown to have a back operation. So he went to his GP to ask for assistance for transport, and he couldn't receive that. He also found it difficult for his partner to go with him because, as I said, he was codependent and agoraphobic. So what we did was liaise with the hospital and managed to get the partner to join him for the day for the operation. And we also then provided transport there and then, as well as telephone support throughout the day prior to his operation and after his operation. We went on then to provide him counselling sessions. He actually started off with twice a week counselling sessions, as well as key working twice a week as well. He received mindfulness classes, an osteopath to deal with his pain. And what we find is with a lot of our chaps actually, that they do have underlying issues of pain, and their pain is linked to their mental health. So if their mental health is bad, their pain is bad, and vice versa. So again, working holistically with that person as a whole, we addressed the whole of that person. He then went on to going out on his own. He started his driving lessons. He was going up to London. His passion was, he was a drummer. He's now actually went up to London doing auditions for a band. He's passed his test. He goes up to London on his own. He goes around the country with this band. And he also actually does a little bit of mentoring as well, with telling his story of what he's done with our staff training. Actually, we use him and a few other chaps that have left us, although they still are linked with us, to do some staff training with the key workers, to let them know how important it is, that role as a key worker really is, and what that meant to that individual. So as I mentioned, we are very holistic, and part of that is as the criteria is that we get the chaps to do some of this. We don't do it just for the sake of it. We do it to regulate those individuals. When they come to us, they are extremely tense, spiraling out of control. So what we have found is all of these holistics help regulate an individual and calm their body down, sometimes withdrawing the stress and anxiety. That also then calms their mind down, and then that enables us then to do the work with the individual. So we had a 15-year-old lad, and he twice a week goes to boxing classes. In lockdown he couldn't do that, so the charity provided him with a punch bag and all of the equipment. And that helped to regulate him so that he was able to then do his key working and also his counselling. As I mentioned before, we've got his charity fishing group. So they all get together online, and also the aim is to go out. Actually, we've got quite a few waters now. And it's just to experience, I don't know if any of you chaps are into fishing, but that whole purpose of sitting by the riverbank and that tranquility, and that really does do an awful lot for a person's mental health. We have online every week different classes, whether that's meditation, yoga, qigong, tap-in therapy, and obviously, as I said, sometimes our mentors and key workers do online stuff as well. So again, that can enable us to be UK based, because we do actually get, believe it or not, lots of referrals from all over the UK. But at the moment, we only deal with the Southeast. But it's something that I would like to expand on, purely because there is a lack of a need for men's mental health. There's lots of, obviously we've got a mental health system, but what we have found is it's not one size fits all. Men are very different to females, and we can't put them in the same box. They have very different needs, and as we all know, and different responsibilities, and also generically a different way and makeup of that. So what we have got this beautiful woodland, and we go back to being with boys, basically, even though I'm not a boy, but we go back to being boys. And what we do with some of the kids and some of the men, and the aim is to grow on this, is taking them into this beautiful woods. Again, in itself is a very tranquil environment. We do, the aim is to do art therapy, environmental art therapy, a lot of clay work, wood carving, bushcrafting, and just being a Boy Scout, basically. And here is around sort of regression. So we regress back to being that child, and then rebuild and redevelop that child, or that boy, that man. And as I said, regarding developing, that's exactly what his charity does. We develop people. It's sometimes that personal development. Some of our chaps have never had that before. They've never had the role models of that male role model to steer them through their life journey. And sometimes their life journey has been so horrific that it is regressing and rebuilding in another format, teaching them, rather than saying with that internal dialogue that some have had since childhood, I can't do that, I've got mental health, I've got anger management problems. It's like, no, you haven't. You have an emotion because you're human, and let's start developing that person to rebuilding and making sure that they are on a different path. So in general, I would say what we do as a service is that we work from the heart, for starters, is that we develop a new person, and that is, in a sense, preventing suicide.